How tricks?
Good, yeah. It's been an exciting, busy week. Good to be nearing the end of it, but lots going on in and outside of GovX digital world. So, yeah.
I think this is my second podcast of the day. I've got a third one coming up in a couple of hours' time. So, who knew that putting together conferences would be such a sort of full-on multimedia sort of experience?
Well, my feeling on 2020 is that there is now more content in the world than I'm capable of processing. So it needs to be targeted and focused. The fact that I don't commute anymore means I struggle to get through my usual podcast and download viewing. And it's a struggle. It's a modern struggle, but I'm dealing with it, and I'm having to carve out chunks of time in the day to reference the sources and find the things I go to normally.
Very interesting. So that would make me feel that this is a wonderful moment for the niche media to demonstrate its value, because obviously when there's a world awash with content, the more general you are, I think possibly the less grasp you have on people's attention. Whereas when you're very niche and focused, I think that your audience is going to be obviously smaller, but potentially much more sticky, because you are really addressing their priorities.
Yeah.
And what could be more niche than a public sector transformation podcast? So away from the world of work, so what have you been watching online or otherwise? What's been any recommendations?
Well, given the pressures of so much content, so few finite hours, in what marks a major commitment, I've started a new multi-series kind of box set, for want of a better word, Succession, which is an HBO drama, very, very thinly disguised take on the Murdoch dynasty. So it's based in New York. There's a big global media conglomerate led by this hugely dominant patriarch, and he then has several siblings who are vying and jockeying for position to succeed him and or carve out their own niche in the shadow of their father. Got Brian Cox in it, so it's bound to be good. Tremendous actor. And yeah, it's a good one because it feels clever, a bit like The West Wing used to feel clever and make you feel good about yourself. This in a slightly different way. I'm not trying to say we're trying to take over the media world, but it's a sort of invigorating, loosely relevant inspiration.
I see. I hadn't even thought of that, but so it's sort of potentially a model for how we as budding sort of new media types might sort of view things.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that in the first episode they get completely done over by a new media business who almost kind of pull their pants down, to use the vernacular, in terms of a takeover. And then at the last minute, a bit of good old-fashioned brutality and blackmail saves the day. So it's the interesting tension between the smarts of the new world media and the old-fashioned muscle of, I've got a big multi-billion-dollar company, so eventually I'll win out. Which is a nice little sort of, snapshot of the current struggles that are going on with the upstarts versus the established brands, which we obviously have an interest in.
That's not here, of course, because we pride ourselves on just focusing on the audience and focusing on the addressing their needs through the conference. So I guess a little bit less melodramatic here at GovX Digital, but I suppose what's been preoccupying me, life on Mars, is that something you've come across? So it's
yeah, I mean, I'll allow for the fact that you were out of the country for several years and therefore maybe catching up on things. I mean, I don't know when that came out, a while ago.
2008. So I realise it's it's possibly one that everyone's seen and sort of forgotten, but I'm sort of going into it fresh and quite invigorated by it. So I think it's set in 1973, which, as everyone knows, is a fantastic vintage for I suppose conference producers and podcast hosts. And it sets up an affectionate culture clash between the 21st century cop with his 21st century attitudes and policing sort of approach and he wakes up after a car accident and is transported back in time to a macho, chain-smoking, instinct-driven 70s office environment, and I find it fascinating. Obviously, it's not real, obviously. So its depiction of the 70s is very much a 21st century depiction of what the 70s was like. But I do love the small details, such as the sound of electric milk floats and the jingling of milk bottles and other little nods to 1970s and early 80s culture. Which,
a rarely heard sound these days. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's. And is there any way you want to make a tenuous link to the modern world of public sector excellence, or should we just not play that game today?
I mean, I'm sure given enough time, I could come up with something. But one of the things we failed to achieve in the last podcast, and probably we're going to do the same again, was keep to our notional 15 minutes. So let's crack on. But,
well, speaking of 15 minutes, the breakout political star of the week is undoubtedly the artist known as Mike Pence's Fly. I don't know whether you saw much of the vice presidential debate, but a big housefly landed on Mike Pence's snowy white hair and hung around for quite a long time, to the point where it became a sort of, as these things do, a sort of internet sensation. Within 12 hours, it had its own Twitter account with 100,000 followers.
Mike Pence's Fly has a Twitter account.
Yeah, and it was sort of the breakout star of the debate, according to bored people who didn't really want to understand the political implications of what was being said on stage. This sort of thing amuses me, but then slightly depresses me as well. If this is where we're at in terms of people's attention span and willingness to engage with political discourse, is that a fair comment?
I mean, interesting. So essentially, people tune in to a debate between two vice presidential candidates who, bearing in mind the age and health of their superiors, stand a reasonable chance that they might sort of inherit the role of the most powerful position in the world, if not the Western world. But so when people are tuning into this debate, the key takeaway is that a fly landed on someone's head, and there is sufficient focus on that a Twitter account, Mike Pence's Fly, I mean, I'm going to follow it as well, right? So we'll set off the back of that sort of obsession with something that is so non-core. I mean, it's funny and it's cute, and I may well follow the Mike Pence's Fly Twitter account just for a laugh for 5 minutes. But surely this is a lesson of where we don't want to end up as. I think we've seen with conversations about Brexit here in the UK, and we've seen sort of a level of toxicity come into political discourse. We've seen people sort of self-identify into sort of niche tribes. I think social media has played a role in encouraging people to sort of congregate with other like-minded people. And so, in a sense, as I mentioned before, this podcast, I guess, is an example of a very niche interest. I mean, public sector transformation. But the challenge of when you spend your time in groups of people who view the world exactly the same way is that you forget that you're in an echo chamber. This is exactly the opposite of how we need to live our lives. We mustn't surrender the sort of the common ground between people and their different perspectives.
So I guess the general lesson for us is that this is a lesson for calling for more diversity. We need to be much more focused on ensuring that there is a breadth of perspective and opinion both in our social groups but also professionally. I think that we've had recent statements which have really sort of called upon government to be much more mindful of being more diverse. We've obviously had last week, I think, great interview with Bernadette Thompson, where she referred to how, in her early stages of her career, she was sometimes the only woman in the room at a meeting, which, is impossible. Thankfully, it's impossible to imagine now. But the idea that you could have a room full of people once upon a time with no women in it making decisions, and obviously not just women, sort of race and sort of all other sort of protected characteristics, and beyond that, I think that cognitive diversity really, the whole idea that decision making should be done by a sort of narrow group of people who look and sound like you and me, Southerners, metropolitan types, work in and around London. I think that that's something which the government has spoken about.
Yeah, there's various statements, and spats might be overstating, but discussions around the nature and the competence of the civil service. Lord Agnew, the civil service minister, sort of got involved last week. A couple of aspects to it. Initially, there was a sort of bit of a debate around the level of spending on external consultants in the civil service, which, whilst high, also has to acknowledge the fact that Brexit and COVID have been and are still happening, and therefore exceptional times. And there's a sort of contradiction there, because they're criticised for the amount of external consultants being brought in, but at the same time criticised for their supposed sort of groupthink. So by bringing in external voices, are you not sort of tackling the very issue that you're also being criticised for? So I think there's a sort of conundrum there where the civil services are sort of being criticised for doing one thing, and if they do the other, they meet equal criticism as well. And I think what's interesting,
it seems completely unfair. I mean, obviously, as you said, 2020, it's not been without its fair share of unique generational, once in a generation challenges. And as you try to build up surge capacity to deal with these unprecedented, obviously unplanned for challenges at this scale, you're going to need help. And why would you not turn to expertise in the private sector? I mean, there's plenty of expertise in the public sector, but where you need more, because you've got a short-term acute crisis which requires more brains to be thrown as an issue and help with execution, seems entirely appropriate to the private sector to help.
It's interesting, depending on the lens of and the sort of media narrative at the time. A succession of prime ministers have brought in celebrated business people as their business czar, and everybody applauds at the time and says, yeah, we need this commercial expertise, we need to bring in outside voices, which is comparable to the idea of bringing in commercially minded consultancies. Now, consultants get a going over in the media and the amount of spending, and it kind of gets dragged into the sort of murky general distrust of the big four and these kind of firms. But actually, like the top echelons of the civil service, there are good people in all organisations, and therefore you just got to pick the right ones. This sort of reductive argument that spending money on consultancy is bad, and there's a level of groupthink and institutionalised thinking in the civil service. I mean, there may be at times, but there are also exceptional people in roles there. So I think we have to be cautious about just slipping into those easy judgments and big broad brushstrokes about institutions and thinking and that sort of stuff.
And I think the quality of the civil service is, if not world beating, because that's sort of a little bit sort of, I suppose, parochial, but certainly, it is of an extremely high standard. And I think that, the very fact that, using GDS as an example, countries around the world have sought to copy what we've done with the government digital service, and how the approach we've taken to the usability across all government websites and consolidating it to a single website. I mean, these ideas were absolutely made in Britain. Privatisation in the 80s, obviously to a certain extent controversial, but not really. I mean, sort of the idea that the state should be involved in sort of commanding heights of the economy is quite a fringe belief now. So I mean, again, that was a development which came out of the UK, UK public sector. So I think that there are, there always have been sort of, world-class talents, as you'd expect, in the UK civil service, and nothing has changed there. What's possibly changed is that we've become more aware that, as I said before, it's a bit too southern, it's a bit too male, it's a bit too white, it's possibly a bit too straight. And we did in a previous role, I worked quite a lot with the public sector up in Liverpool, and they were constantly talking about the challenge of getting answers and decisions, and the quality of those answers and decisions from civil servants and departments that were all headquartered in London. And as people all know, the UK public sector is one of the most centralised civil services in the Western world. And that, I think, is something which has been acknowledged. We heard that in the Ditchley lecture by Michael Grove. He basically sort of called out that we need real diversity, and it's all of the sort of diversity characteristics we mentioned before, but it's also cognitive diversity, geographic diversity. It's not viewing everything as a sort of as a nail for a sort of a London-shaped hammer to hit. I think that the signs are very positive. The government has been talking about this; it's acknowledged it. I understand that there's going to be a command paper published in the coming weeks, which essentially is going to take the essence of Gove's remarks in the Ditchley lecture and all the themes that he touched upon, and basically give instruction to the civil service about how to take those ideas forwards and operationalize them. So I think that we are living through extremely exciting times.
Yeah.
I mean, since the 80s, we've seen such a sort of root and branch approach to changing the civil service for the better, and for the government to be focused on the civil service, I think can only be a good thing for the civil service.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to be great timing when we get together with 1,000 public sector leaders in November 17th to the 19th. For those of you who haven't got those dates burned into their brains yet, check the show notes for booking links. There we go. They make a marketer of me yet? But the timing is going to be hugely exciting, because there's going to be a statement of intent. There's going to be a direction of travel to really get into, and therefore bringing people together to discuss those implications, to start to sort of formulate a way forward to enact the sort of political will is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess an example of that is the fact that we've got, Rupert McNeill, who's the UK government's chief people officer. So obviously he's one of our speakers, and the reason he's speaking is because these are issues that are very front and centre of what the civil service is focused on. And he will be talking about the nature of expertise in the public sector, and how, if nothing else, 2020 has shown that experts aren't people in white coats. They're not scientists and doctors and lawyers. They are they're frontline workers. They're people with expertise. They're nurses, and they are care workers, and so the concept of expertise and specialisation sort of is broadened. And what flows on from that is that when the government talks about wanting to have genuine experts in throughout the civil service, it's talking about upgrading the skills that civil servants have to make them specialists. We're not talking about parachuting in sort of yet more pale male stale sort of experts from outside the public sector. We're talking about investing in the assessment of the skills requirements for the civil service, recruiting the right people, providing the ongoing lifelong training to get them to sort of, as they progress through their career, become experts in the functions that they're responsible for, which, as I said, very exciting times. Really pleased to have Rupert McNeill joining us for the session on civil service leadership. He's one of many people that we have speaking in the people and teams stream of conference, which a lot of these issues being unpacked and discussed.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be good to have meaningful sort of show and tells and conversations from different departments, different regions, and really drill into what skills and capability and people development is going to look like, for the next 10, 15 years, as opposed to broad, brushstroke briefings and arguments played out through the media. We actually want to get into the meat of this rather than just sort of allow this good, bad debate to continue.
Something very practical. I mean, he's spoken about how automation is going to change, obviously, the civil service fundamentally. I mean, it's there now, and it's only going to increase its impact. And he's spoken about how it's like taking the robot out of the human. So all those repetitive tasks will be automated, allowing workers, staff to focus on the non-repetitive value-adding tasks, and I think that's hugely important for how people view expertise in civil service, but also how technology is going to change the civil service, but in I think very exciting and positive ways. Yeah.
Well, let's leave with that positive statement, vision of an AI enhanced new level of capability in the public sector would be nice. And we'll I don't know whether we'll be able to sort of automate Mike Pence's fly, but it remains the star of the week that we will go and follow and enjoy its musings for the rest of the week, and then regroup this time next week.
Great, can't wait. So obviously enjoy everyone out there, enjoy your weekends, make sure that you don't get snapped with a fly on your head, apparently. So I think it might stand out in mine, so that's something to watch out for.
Yeah.
Hopefully, there'll be no flying up James's head Twitter account established over the weekend.
It'll struggle to get 100,000 followers, we know that much. So, all right, signing off, and we'll see you again soon.
Cool.
Bye.
Cheers.